Hi everyone, welcome back to the garden, and what appears to be a really bad 80s music video going off this kind of lighting. But this morning, yes it's early, I was up early for work anyway, so I thought I'd pop into the garden quickly, put a video together to show you the garden after the coldest night of the year. Now admittedly, that's not hard because it's still the first week of the year, but after last week's record temperatures, 15-degree days, double figures at night, going down to -5, which is about what it's here now, that's certainly a shock to the system. Now, it's not a catastrophic sort of temperature, but it's a bit of a tricky one really, because if it only went down to -2, -3 for a night, all I do is just put a bit of fleece over certain plants, just the Musa basjoo bananas, plants like that, and the rest of them I would just leave to it. Whereas if it was even colder, down to -6, -7, then at the weekend I would have wrapped up pretty much all my tree ferns and got a lot of plants really prepared for it. But somewhere in the middle, it creates a tricky sort of situation in terms of what you actually protect and what you leave to it. So I thought I'd put together a video this morning. Well, this is what the plan is anyway. Just show you around the garden, show you which plants I have protected, which ones I've left to the elements, and also show you a bit about microclimates, which parts of the garden have been hit by the frost and which ones are relatively protected. It'll also be interesting to see the effects of the cold on the tougher evergreen plants in the garden, the ones that I don't protect, because although a lot of them are really hardy, really tough plants, they still get affected by the cold. And it's often only a temporary sort of change, but they change in appearance completely. Some of them droop down, change colour, and it's really quite interesting to see. So anyway, I'll show you around the garden. Don't expect a clean, tidy winter wonderland. I didn't tidy at the weekend, and in fact the temperatures didn't actually look too bad. It looked like it was only going to drop to around freezing, but I keep refreshing the weather app pretty much every day, and I saw it dropping down. And it's always a really good sign, if you see that temperature dropping down, that it could drop down further, and predictably it did. Went from -3 down to -4, then -5 last night. And there was also really clear sky. So if you've got cold air, a clear sky, it definitely means a hard freeze and a hard frost, which is exactly what I've got here. So anyway, enough rambling, let's show you around the garden quickly, and hopefully there'll be some helpful tips to help you with your garden next time it's cold. So we'll start off then at the messy end of the garden. This is my temporary polytunnel setup. I've got a heater in there, just keeping it to around 2 or 3 degrees. So not hot at all, but just to keep that real deep cold away from some of the potted plants. Anything more tender is inside. And look at this absolute mess here. I did put a load of fleece over these plants, but fortunately last night it was that really bad combo of cold and windy, which means everything gets blown off. But anyway, down here, just chucked a little bit over the middle of that tree fern. That was more because I had some fleece left over and I might as well use it. But here you can see a plant I didn't protect, and that is a Trachycarpus princeps new form hybrid. So you can see it's got a beautiful sort of silvery blue look to the leaves, which in this kind of weather with a bit of frost, it looks fantastic. That one, I don't worry about protecting it at all, especially when it's get down to sort of -4, -5 for short periods. It'll be able to take that in its stride. It's only when it gets a few degrees lower than that and for a longer period that I'd start to be concerned. Unlike this plant here. Now, this is my Cyathea medullaris, the black tree fern, and I actually lost this frond, which was the new frond, the last time it was cold. It's a massive plant to protect. If I stand back, you can sort of get an idea of it. The actual plant itself is probably 5 metres across, and it's only a young one. So what I've done is I've prioritised actually wrapping the main trunk itself. So as you can see, the straw pushing the top to protect the new croziers. I've wrapped the whole trunk with fleece. And really, this fleece over the actual fronds is pretty much a token effort really. But one thing I have found is the new fronds, like this one here, they don't really take a frost at all. But once they've hardened off a bit, like this one here, you can see, yes, there's a little bit of damage, but they still stay pretty green. Going forwards, I will be protecting this fern in a more sort of permanent way in winter, actually building a structure around it. And a lot of people actually choose to chop the fronds off at the start of winter and protect the whole thing. So really, any fronds that I can get through are a bonus. That's the way I'm looking at it, and it'll mean it grows faster next year. But sometimes, like this one here, this is a frond that actually got caught in a late frost, and as you can see, it's blackened quite a bit. So it's a plant that it is fast growing, so I'm not too concerned. It might sound like I'm not bothered, but it's more a case of as long as the actual plant survives, any fronds that I can get through with just a light fleece covering, it's a bonus. So here is a tougher tree fern. This is one of my Dicksonia antartica, the one that's leaning into the garden. And if you watch my video all about overwintering tree ferns, you'll see that this is stage 2. So stage 1 is what I do at the start of winter when we get frosts, which is basically packing straw into the crown of the plant. And stage 2, further down, it's wrapping the top foot of trunk. And that's important because that's where most of the growing point of the plant is. That's the part that's most sort of vulnerable to winter damage. So with these kind of temperatures, -4, -5 for just one night, all I've done is just loosely wrap that top foot of trunk with some fleece just to keep the worst of the cold off. Obviously, if it was going to get any colder or the period of cold was going to be any longer, I would have wrapped more of the trunk more substantially. But as it is, we're pretty much all right. So here, again, it looks like a complete mess. I did have this fleece in a more structured way, but one of the problems, like I said, with wind is it does disrupt fleece. So you either protect full on and actually wrap things down properly, protect them really permanently, or you don't really bother, you just sort of chuck a bit of fleece on like I've done here. So with tree ferns, you can see here, the fronds are quite frosted. Unfortunately, you might lose some fronds when it gets to these kind of temperatures. You can see where they start to blacken a bit. And it's just really an unfortunate reality of growing these plants here in the UK. In mild winters, the fronds will stay green, but when you get to around these kind of temperatures, it can blacken them off. But there's no point, or there's no practical way of actually protecting them all. So as you look across there, you can see a frosty view. I couldn't fleece all those fronds, it just wouldn't be worth it. So like I said, the main thing is to actually focus on the trunk itself and keep the plant alright, because you will get new croziers, new fronds in spring. So you can see another one just quickly wrapped up. And just to show you quickly a bit of sort of microclimate here, if I go back and look at this plant, you can see just how white that one is, hopefully. And this one's quite an exposed fern. So what I've done is I've tried to protect the trunks of the more exposed ones. But then as we come under here, you can see they've got an overhead cover of more tree ferns. There's a couple of trees up there. So these ones, there's nowhere near as much frost on them. Hopefully that's obvious. Or to show you down here, that one there, a couple of microclimate tips here. There's absolutely no frost on that one whatsoever. And that's because it's got overhead cover. And probably the easiest way to think about frost damage is, if you look up from a plant, if you can see sky and it's in an exposed location, then it will get frosted. Whereas if it's got plants above it, it acts like a blanket really. The more vegetation above it, the less cold it gets. So that's why these plants here are still green, absolutely no frost at all. And another microclimate tip is that I've actually planted them close to a wall. So here, it's just a brick shed, there's no heat in there whatsoever, but even in the middle of winter, just having a wall like this, it's enough to pick up the rays of the sun, radiate them back out at night, and just give plants another fraction of a degree, which every little bit helps. Now, this sorry looking plant you can see there, that's a Schefflera, that one is my chilensis, and as you can see, it doesn't look too happy. And like a lot of evergreen plants, the leaves do look a bit crinkled, they go a little bit darker, but it'll bounce back. I've got absolutely no concerns about it. Yes, if it was going to get much colder, I would protect it, but that's only because it's small. The reality is with these kind of plants is that that's going to grow and it's going to push through that tree fern canopy in a matter of years, and at that point you won't be able to protect it anyway. So I think it's important, if you've got tall growing evergreens, to be quite realistic with your choices, or definitely where you choose to plant them, because long term you won't be able to protect them forever. Heading through, we've got the Zantedeschia Hercules, which I did chuck a bit of fleece over. Yes, it's tough, but my thinking with that is, if it's going to be -4, the temperatures could be out by a couple of degrees. That's the problem in rural locations. The temperatures are never quite accurate on the forecasts. So I wanted to cover it just to try to keep it alive. And as you can see, it looks like it's almost melted into the floor. It's a plant that certainly reacts to the cold, and any kind of sharp frost, it's enough to make the leaves go soft and droop down. But it will bounce back. The plant, 100% I'm sure it'll be alive. It's just really a case of it's going to look a little bit messy while it bounces back. So heading through, you can see there, wraps another tree fern. I only wrapped the taller, more exposed ones. Really, these ones close to the shed I didn't need to bother with. But this one, I've actually left the old fronds on. And as you can see, they, in a way, actually help protect the trunk. It's a sort of natural protection method. They emulate what the fleece does. Because all the fleece does, really, is it traps that warmer air in, and it gives a surface for the frost to sort of fall on, if you like. Obviously, it's not quite the same as a blanket on a person, because a person generates their own heat, plants don't. But still, it helps keep the frost off. Anything that really helps a degree or so is definitely worthwhile. So as we head out then, this is one of my favourite plants to look at when it's cold and frosty. It's another Trachycarpus princeps new form hybrid, but they're quite a variable plant, and this one, it's got absolutely massive leaves, and I just think they look amazing. Here I've just got a little light put on top of the camera, but just look at that white colour with the frost on it as well. I think it's absolutely magical. Just amazing structure. But heading through then, this is the winter wonderland, and there you can see it does look very amateurish, and that's exactly what it is. That is my phoenix palm, and let's just show you a better view of it. The problem with phoenixes is they're not entirely hardy. In fact, they're far from it. Here up north, you need a very sort of sheltered location at the minute to actually get one through. These temperatures, they won't kill it, and it did take -6 early in 2021. But you can see there, as I look at the frond, you can see those dark patches in the middle of it, hopefully. And that's basically just the leaf reacting to the cold, but it'll bounce back. But the problem with phoenixes is, on the new leaves, or the new fronds, which aren't quite as tough, you might see some damage, which will probably look something like there, the brown tips. So all I did is I put a bit of fleece over the newest fronds to hopefully keep that away. But it's not a plant I'm especially worried about, because these aren't killing temperatures, and the good thing about these palms is, even in our sort of paltry summers up here, it's still a fast growing palm, so it'll grow the damage out quickly. That's a Butia odorata, a small one. Those, they're not quite as tough as you might expect, and as tough as I thought they were, but this one, it's a younger plant. I didn't really have time to put it in the polytunnel, and again, these aren't killing temperatures, but you can see there, you get a bit of temporary marking on the fronds. That will disappear within, say, like a few hours after it's warmed up, so that's not a concern about it long term. I just chuck some fleece over it again, just to keep that new spear protected, because that's the most vulnerable part of the plant. But in reality, I could have left that out, especially if it was in the ground. Any plant that's in the ground is tougher than the one in a container. And that's because in the ground, you've got more residual heat from the earth itself. The roots spread down further. The roots aren't vulnerable to actual freeze damage from the outside. Whereas this pot, if you imagine, it's got cold air all around it. And that's how the roots can actually freeze through a lot quicker. And once the plant's got frozen roots, it needs to be very tough to survive. But this one, just because it's really cold for one night, I'm not especially worried. With temperatures bounce back to 5 degrees tomorrow. Whereas if it was going to be a few consecutive nights of minus temperatures, some ice stays where it doesn't go above freezing, then plants like that I would definitely get in the polytunnel while I can. Here's one that I didn't bother protecting. Probably not the best plant really, but it's one of the purple cordylines. They're not as tough as the green ones. And what I found is smaller plants do take a bit of damage, but large ones like this are absolutely all right. So that one, we'll see what it does. Worst case is I think it'll get a bit of brown into some of the leaves, but again, it's a fast growing one. Even in a pot, it's relatively fast growing, so it'll soon grow it out. Heading through then, see the Trachycarpus. All the berries on it there, all the fruit. Again, Trachycarpus fortunei, absolutely no need to protect at these temperatures, or pretty much any temperatures you'll see in any normal UK winter, certainly for most of the UK. Got the cannas. This year I've left more of my cannas in the ground than ever before. Some I've mulched with a manure, some I've just put a bit of straw on top. That's more because I had some straw left over. But heading around here, you'll see a couple more interesting plants. So there, we've got the Scheffler and Macrophylla. Now, this is a plant that's, well, it's certainly a visually striking plant, well, when it's not drooping like this, but it's a plant that seems to be quite divisive in the exotic garden community. Some people say you need to be in Cornwall to get away with growing it. I don't know, individuals like Yorkshire Chris grow it up in Yorkshire, and he doesn't have any issues with it at all. So this time, I've not protected it. I suspect we're a few degrees away from temperatures that would really worry it, and what you can see is it droops quite a bit. But most Scheffleras, most of these evergreen plants, they do develop, like this Taiwaniana here, a sort of drooping appearance when it's cold. But like I said, to give you more vague reassurance, it's absolutely fine, they'll bounce back. If you look there at the back, even the Fatsias, the spider's web, they have that drooping sort of green glazed appearance, but they will bounce back. Now here, moderately interesting, Tetrapanax. This is a Tetrapanax rex. And this plant, I'll just tell you quickly about it. At the old house, I had a small plant in the garden, and that, in the first year of growing this Tetrapanax, I protected it. The trunk was about half as high as this one. I wrapped it up in fleece for maybe a month or so when it was really cold, and it rotted away. that was the only time I protected a Tetrapanax, and the reality is, for most winters, once they're passed around a foot tall, they don't need it. And if you protect it, all you do is you trap the moisture in around the trunk, and it can actually rot away. So honestly, trust me, if your Tetrapanax is over a foot tall, if it's planted out, don't do anything to it. Now, it might be deciduous, you'll get some of the leaves turning black like that, but the actual plant itself will survive and it will start growing away again next spring. Absolute worst case is you might get some damage to the growing point, but it will sprout off lower down the trunk and it will create some really interesting sort of multi-stem plant. So I don't think really there's any benefit in protecting them unless the temperatures get really silly. So this one, you can actually see it was green. That leaf there, still green. Whether it will be, whether that new leaf will still be there over the next few days, we'll see. Because a lot of the time, the effects from the cold, they do take a while to actually display themselves. But still, it's not a plant that I want to protect. And one thing that I will say is, when I did protect it and it died back, that same plant, it actually died back right to the ground. It rotted away. But very close to the main stem, another plant popped up. And I was really pleased to see that, because that particular Tetrapanax, which is this one here, was the fastest growing, biggest plant I had. So this one is a very vigorous form, and it also seems to hold its leaves green well into winter. So again, not a plant I'm worried about protecting. Unlike up here, the Musa basjoo banana. Now this one, I haven't wrapped it this winter, which is potentially, it sounds like a little bit lazy, we'll say laid back, efficient. Now, what you can do with bananas, if you live in a colder area, is just put 4 stakes around the plant, wrap fleece around the whole thing, pack it with straw, and put something over the top to stop the water getting in. But with this one, this year, I've decided to take a chance that it might be a mild winter. I've not protected it. So what I've done is, I've just chucked some fleece over, which you just loosely wrap round. And at these kind of temperatures, they're very tough plants, and it shouldn't be enough to actually damage it. And one little tip, if I could just show you inside there, well, I won't take it all off, but you can see I've actually left the old leaves on, because what they do is they turn brown, they fall down around that pseudostem, and they actually give some protection themselves. In a sense, like the tree ferns, they actually create their own kind of natural fleece and actually shelter that stem from the cold. So again, it's not a plant I'm especially concerned about, but at these temperatures, it seems a shame to actually lose a young plant, so I thought it's worth chucking some fleece over. Now, if it was a more established clump, I probably wouldn't worry, but I have a load of this fleece in the shed anyway. I do save my fleece from one year to the next. I keep the good fleece to wrap in the tree ferns and stuff like that, and then old bits just like this. Always keep fleece, it's made of plastic, you can reuse it. It doesn't matter if it looks a bit grubby or it's got holes in it, you can still use it to protect plants like this, and it just keeps the worst of the cold off. There's a phormium there, and as you can see, it looks dramatically different to what it does usually. All the leaves have curled in on themselves. You can see that they're very narrow now, very dark. I mean, look at that one there. It's about a quarter of its usual sort of width, and it's properly curled in. But that's just a normal reaction to the cold. Again, I've got absolutely no concerns about it. That's just what it does as a reaction to the cold, and it'll bounce back as soon as it gets some sun in it, as soon as it warms up. Eucalyptus there. Again, they look fantastic with a bit of frost on them. Beautiful blue silvery colour. So just quickly heading back up this way, you'll see some more plants and more protection methods. I do like the sound of walking on a frosty ground. It's lovely, isn't it? So these tree ferns here, all I've done is again protect the middle. So I'll just show you that. Just simply grab a handful of straw, if you have straw just lying around the place, push it into the crown. And on these, because I had the fleece left over, I pushed a ball of fleece into the crown, and that's all I do. Because these ones, there's so many fronds protecting the actual trunk itself, I didn't really need to go to the effort of actually wrapping it. But if I saw temperatures less than -5, if it was say -6, -7, or again I knew it was going to last for a few days, I would certainly wrap that trunk to really keep the cold out. So I suppose the question is here, again this bit, there's no trees directly above here. You can see that these fronds are definitely a lot whiter. Will they make it through? Will they not? It's a bit of a gamble really, we'll see. It's one of those things you can't really do a lot to affect it. I just sort of learned to, just accept the bonuses when they do come. It's just a part of growing tree ferns in the UK. But if you've got it in a more sheltered spot, like the one that was just tucked under there, it's more likely to keep the fronds from one year to the next. So this ghost-like structure there is actually an Echium. Now, Echiums are another plant that I think you need to learn to just sort of roll with the weather, take your chances, and if they make it, that's great. If they don't be too worried about it. And really, these kind of temperatures, I'll just tuck that banana back in there, these kind of temperatures, they're not going to kill it necessarily if it's in a shelter spot, but it is on the borderline. If it got to below -5, the plant would most likely be toast, especially if it's out in the open. But here, this one's actually got a fair bit of tree cover. I put the fleece over it, and at the minute it's still standing strong. But as you can see, again, all the leaves, they droop down. Echiums are notorious for this. They look like they're going to completely die and wilt off, but within a few hours they perk up, and chances are it should look absolutely fine. So heading through, see there, another example tree fern that I've wrapped up. So this one has got a bit of overhead cover, but the main reason I've wrapped it is because that's the new one that I actually planted last spring. So it hasn't got as much of a sort of root mass under the ground compared to the ones that I planted from pots. So I thought I'd just give it a little bit of extra TLC, just to help keep that cold out. Try to give it the best chance of getting the biggest fronds it can next spring. So heading through here, the Gunnera manicata. Those are still under the giant leaves, basically wigwams or umbrellas above them, and I've not bothered to protect them. And really, they're not a plant I worry about. Having seen just before Christmas, went to Scotland, went to Glasgow Botanic Gardens, there's some there, there's some in Chatsworth in some real cold spots, there's some down in Cornwall. There's lots of places where all they do is protect them with the leaves, and I really like the look of the leaves as they start to turn brown and go crispy. They're just so alien-like. But again, they're a plant I don't protect beyond this point. The only time when Gunneras get tricky is they start growing quite early. So as soon as the temperatures warm up in maybe February or March, they will start growing. And at that point, I do actually fleece the new leaves because they actually push through. They push some of these leaves away. And I know from last year, it's important to protect the new leaves because often the ones that push through first are the leaves that become the biggest that year. So it's worth giving them a bit of fleecing. But at this time of year, while the plant's dormant, there's no concerns at all. At the back here, you can see Rhododendron sinogrande. That plant has looked a bit rough, and I suspect with all these thirsty Gunneras, it probably doesn't, well, it doesn't get as much water in the summer as it would like. But in winter, it looks even rougher when there's a hard frost. The leaves completely droop down, but again, like all the other evergreens, it will bounce back. That is a Schefflera, that's Rhododendrofolia, and that one seems to have taken it really well. It's killed up a little bit, but again, no concerns about it whatsoever. These temperatures, not a problem. It's my other biggest tree fern, and again, it's one I've left the fronds on, but just to add to that, because it's the biggest one, I've wrapped it up. So if it seems like there's no logic with my tree ferns, essentially what I've done is I've wrapped the top foot of trunk for plants that are either in an exposed spot, plants that are newly planted, or really big ones that I simply couldn't afford to replace because they cost so much more these days. So that's my logic behind it, but that's entirely down to the temperatures where I am. So I think that's probably another important tip. Don't just do what everyone else is doing. Look at the temperatures for your area. Learn which parts of your garden get cold. Come out early in the morning. You don't have to come out as early as this, but come out and just see which areas get more frost and use that to sort of decide what you're going to protect. So my method of protection this year, they might seem a little bit haphazard, a bit reactive, but I think for me, it's my sort of evolution of over the years, going from overprotecting some plants, protect things that just didn't need to be protected, seeing some of the problems that creates, to now just being a bit more laid back, doing what I need to do at the start of winter, like putting this straw in the crown, but then only sort of doing as and when I need to protect it. If there's a cold night, I will put some extra fleece on. I don't go full crazy at the start of November. There's absolutely no need for it. So here, more tree ferns, and again, all I've done is straw in the crown. And that's because here again, we've got so much overhead cover with all the trees. Yes, there's not many leaves on them, but just having something like that, it just helps trap some of that air close to the ground, keeps the hard frost off them. And all their own fronds obviously help protect their own trunks. So just going through here, there is my Butia Partha or Eris Patha, and that one is a plant that if it was a degree or so colder, I would protect it just to keep the new fronds from getting browning on them like that there. But as it is, it's a really tricky plant to protect. especially when it was cold like it was and windy last night. More importantly, you can't just put fleece over it because it would just end up in a lump down there. So I've left it. No real concerns about the hardiness of the plant. It will take a good few degrees more, but you know, at the end of the day, it's going to get big one day. It needs to see a bit of cold, so I'm not too worried about it. The bamboo, the Phyllostachys vivax aureocalis, zero concerns about bamboo. They're so tough, and probably the best thing, if you haven't seen my mulch video, then check it out. There's loads of helpful tips in there about why mulch is the best thing you can do in your garden this time of year, but it's definitely the best thing you can do for bamboos in autumn. And what mulching bamboos does is it helps protect the rhizome that's developing under the ground. It keeps the cold off it, it gives it nutrients, and it also traps that moisture in. So you've got the perfect environment for bamboo growth next spring, or this spring. But also, I think really if you live in a cold area, putting a good thick layer of any kind of organic matter, especially soil conditioner or farmyard manure, over your bamboo, it helps keep the worst of the cold away from it. But here we don't see any temperatures that would actually bother a big bamboo like that. So this is my Echium gardnerianum, the ginger plant, and that one is the only plant I've actually left outside here at the more exposed end of the garden. And again, all I've done is just push some of that farmyard manure right up to it over the base, just to keep the cold from permeating into the rhizome itself. But as you can see here, we're actually under, again, another tree. I've got quite a shaded garden. So here, this bit doesn't see too much frost compared to the more exposed bits. So if you take home one thing from this video, and hopefully you will, it's really about microclimates. If you're planting a garden, and if you're putting plants in that will stay in the ground over winter, it's worth considering not just where they grow well in summer, but where they'll actually tolerate winter temperatures best. And often, if you've got a plant that will take a bit of shade, giving it a shelter spot with some kind of overhead cover or close to a wall, it really does make all the difference. Not just in temperatures like this, but if it was even colder yet, then it would certainly be the difference between life and death. I chucked a fleece over those small Echiums there, but that little one probably won't make it. Just see how sorry it looks for itself. So here, you might be wondering what these are, and here is a sort of top gardening tip, very niche gardening tip. If you've bought some cheap rattan furniture and they come with these stools, and you've got a garden with new agaves in, then they're great for protecting them from the winter rain and freezes. I only put these on the other day. It's not really protection that's needed. And I've got agave, the two hardiest ones, Montana and Avatifolia. They can take temperatures well below this, definitely sort of into the sort of -8, -9, probably even a few degrees lower than that. But because it was rainy the other day, and then it was actually freezing through, I didn't want that ice to be trapped in them because that's what can cause the damage. So yes, if I was organised, I would have proper overhead cover put in place, maybe late November, to keep the rain off them all winter. But here, they're well drained. I've seen that these plants can survive without any protection. So I simply, when I saw the heavy rain going into cold, I just chucked those over the top and it'll help keep that rain off. But I will remove that as soon as the temperatures bounce back, because the one thing that garbage don't like is humidity and moisture. They really need that good airflow, otherwise they rot away. But in terms of actual cold tolerance, they are very tough plants. As are in fact most of the palms in this area. We've got the Chimerops or Camerops, however you want to pronounce it. I suppose Chimerops is botanically correct. We've got the Trachycarpus fortunei strip trunk there, which I think looks really exotic, and I'll probably do a video as I get another one to that kind of effect and strip the trunk on it. Butia odorata, and that one, it's under next door's conifer, so it gets a fair bit of protection from that. And a Jubaea chilensis, which, as I've mentioned in previous videos, is my favourite palm. It's a fantastic plant, and this one, it's really tough. It can take temperatures a good few degrees lower than this, so no protection required, even on the new frond, or the new leaf. There's another Echium there, and here we're at the exposed end of the garden, where the plants have to be tough to survive. This is the sort of transition area. You can see there, Euphorbia mellifera. That one's a little bit of a softer plant, but one that can take these kind of temperatures, zero problem. Trachycarpus fortunei again, looking well frosted. Formiums there, curling up. But really, other than a little bit of reaction from the euphorbias, most plants in here, I like the sound of that walking on that membrane. Sad, I know. You can see here, this really shows the effects of the frost out at this end of the garden. This is exposed, everything's got a proper white frost on it, and evergreens like this, they very easily react to it. And to demonstrate it, look at this Trachycarpus wagnerianus. So hopefully it's a good visual demonstration compared to the plants that were in the middle part of the garden, the more shaded part with all the trees around it. Just look at how white this is. So that's why it's important for borderline plants. If you choose the right spot for it, that's the best thing that you can do at that very early stage. Actually plant it in your garden to ensure its long-term survival. Here are the rocks for my upcoming project. I will be doing a video looking at my projects for this year. And here are 3 of the most exciting plants, maybe 4, we'll include that. They're very, very tough plants. Yes, they're potted, but I'm not giving them any protection in this kind of cold. This plant here, it looks incredible. It's Yucca linearis or linearifolia, and it's the hardiest sort of yucca that's got this effect you can grow. Honestly, I've had this out here alongside my other Yucca rostratas. They got a bit of browning when it got to -6, sort of late last winter. This linearis, absolutely untouched, and it hardly gets any additional watering in the summer. So it looks absolutely fantastic, a real bulletproof hardy plant, and one that I will get in the ground this spring. There, just to show you quickly, I will be doing a video on these, but I know for the hardcore view it's actually still watching at this point, I mean, you might enjoy seeing these. That is a Chemerops or Camerops Vulcano or Vulcano, depending how you want to pronounce it. I'll just sort of mangle my way through most of the pronunciations, but we'll say it's a Chemerops Vulcano, and it's a beautiful looking plant. It's essentially like the standard humilis, but the leaves are packed tightly together, so it's got a beautiful sort of fan-like appearance, almost like the waggy, but it's another Mediterranean dwarf fan palm. So it's a very tough plant, slow growing, but with a beautiful effect to it. And this one here is my Jubutia, which is an absolutely monstrous palm. It's a cross between the Jubaea and the Butia, and one that I certainly wouldn't be able to afford at this year's prices. So if it got any colder than this, I would wrap that pot. But if I nearly trip over that, if I show you, that pot is absolutely huge. It's well over 1 metre across. The plant itself weighs about ½ a tonne. There's no way I'd be able to drag it close to the house. So if it got cold, I have to build some kind of temporary structure over this whole area. Hopefully I don't have to do that, and that's a plant I'm really looking forward to getting in the ground this spring. So that's quite a long rambling look around the garden, but hopefully it's helpful to see which plants are protected to these temperatures and which ones I've just left to it. So obviously by the time you're watching this video, it will have warmed up slightly. I'll use the word warm. It'll be back to the usual sort of chilly UK winter cold. But next time it drops down to around -5, hopefully there's a few tips in this video that'll help you protect your plants. And if you're actually planting your own tropical garden this spring, then it might give you a few ideas about where to position certain plants, the ones that will need a bit of extra care in winter, and the ones you can absolutely leave to it. And if any of your plants do look radically different in the morning after a hard frost, it's not always a case for concern. So if you're stuck with this video this long, thanks a lot for watching, I do appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.